In the State Archives of South Carolina, there is a land survey map from 1860, a work of meticulous hand-drawn detail. It documents every major plantation in Burke County, every creek that feeds the Savannah River, every dirt road that crisscrossed the landscape of cotton and indigo. But in one section, a 900-acre parcel bordering the black water of the Cypress River swamp, there is only a blank space. Where a prosperous property named Cypress Hollow Plantation should be, the map is strangely deliberately empty. Local histories of the period, which speak at length of neighboring estates like the Pinewood and Briarwood plantations, omit Cypress Hollow entirely. It is a place that has been systematically erased from the official record. But it did exist, and the reason for its erasure represents one of the most chilling and deliberately suppressed chapters in the history of the antebellum South. It is a story pieced together from three disparate and unsettling sources. The coded agricultural ledgers of the plantation's mistress, now housed at the University of South Carolina. The oral traditions passed down through the local Gullah Geechee community for more than a century. First recorded by WPA folklorists in the 1930s. And a single terrified letter written by a Charleston physician in 1850. A letter he ordered burned upon his death, but which survived, tucked away and forgotten in the pages of a medical text. These sources, when braided together, tell the story of a slave woman named Zillah, whose alleged supernatural abilities saved a plantation, and then, in an act of terrible justice, destroyed it. In the frightened whispers of her time, they called her a witch. The truth, as pieced together from these fragmented histories, is far more complex and far more terrifying. Before we delve into the full disturbing history of Cypress Hollow, I want to ask you something. If you believe that some histories have been deliberately buried and deserve to be unearthed, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is dedicated to finding those forgotten stories, and I want to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment telling me what state or country you're in. It helps me understand where this history is resonating. Now, let's go back to where the official record ends and the true story begins. Our story properly begins in the year 1847, with Cypress Hollow on the verge of complete and utter collapse. The plantation was a failing enterprise, a ghost of its former prosperity. Its owner, Adelaide Thorne, a man of dwindling fortunes and even worse health, had inherited the estate in its prime but had proven to be a poor manager and an enthusiastic gambler. Financial records from Charleston brokers detail a decade of siphoning the estate's resources to settle debts incurred at the card tables and horse races of Savannah. The plantation's once lucrative indigo fields were exhausted, their soil tired and acidic after decades of single-crop farming, producing yields that were barely a third of what they had been. The enslaved population, which had numbered over 60 in the 1830s, had been depleted by repeated heartbreaking sales to cover Allister's ever-mounting losses. Families were torn apart, with husbands, wives, and children sold to plantations in Alabama and Mississippi, a fate regarded as a death sentence. The physical state of the plantation mirrored its financial ruin. The main house, a once grand structure of whitewashed brick in the federal style, was in a state of advanced disrepair. Paint peeled from the columns, shutters hung from broken hinges, and the roof leaked in half a dozen places, staining the ceilings of the upstairs bedrooms. In the quarters, the small wooden cabins that housed the remaining 31 enslaved people were even worse. Many with leaking roofs and dirt floors that turned to mud in the frequent rains. Fear was a constant, tangible presence. A low hum of anxiety over who would be the next to be sold south. Compounding this financial ruin, Adelaide Thorne himself was dying. He was afflicted by a persistent lung fever, what physicians of the day called consumption, and what we now know as tuberculosis that had left him bedridden, frail, and racked with a constant bloody cough. The plantation was, for all intents and purposes, already a tomb. Then in the winter of 1848, the impossible happened. Adelaide Thorne made a full and seemingly complete recovery. His cough vanished. His strength returned. Almost simultaneously, the fortunes of Cypress Hollow began to reverse. With Thorne inexplicably back on his feet, the fields were reorganized. Within a single year, crop yields, now shifted to a hardier strain of Sea Island cotton, had inexplicably doubled. In a letter to his banker in 1849, a letter which still exists in the Charleston City archives, Thorne credited his wife, Adelaide, and what he called her new scientific methods of crop rotation and soil management. This was the official story, a plausible narrative of shrewd modern agricultural practice that was presented to the outside world. But the enslaved people of Cypress Hollow and their descendants who kept the story alive told a different story. It was a story not of science, but of a woman named Zillah. Zillah is a phantom in the official record. Her name appears only once in the legible inventories of Cypress Hollow, on an 1840 list of property which reads simply, Zillah, female, age 22, skilled in midwifery and herbal remedies. But in the oral traditions of the region, she is a central, almost mythical figure. According to these accounts, Zillah was a healer of extraordinary ability. She was the daughter of an Igbo woman who had been captured in what is now Nigeria, and it was said she inherited her mother's deep knowledge of botany, medicine, and spirituality, a holistic knowledge her fellow slaves called the knowing. Her skills were legendary on the plantation. The stories collected by folklorists tell of her setting a man's shattered leg so perfectly he could work in the fields again when the overseer had been ready to amputate. They tell of her curing children of the croup with a tea made from swamp weeds when white physicians' remedies had failed. Most importantly, she was the plantation's midwife, but her results were not common. In an era when both mother and child frequently died in childbirth, Zillah did not lose a single baby or mother in a decade of practice. She could, the stories insist, turn a breech birth with her bare hands and a quiet prayer. She worked with plants gathered from the deep recesses of the cypress swamp that bordered the plantation, a place the white masters feared but which Zillah treated as her personal apothecary. The other slaves, according to the oral histories, revered and feared her in equal measure. Her power was a source of pride, a shield against the brutality of their lives, but it was also a source of dangerous, unwanted attention. That attention came primarily from Adelaide Thorne, the plantation's mistress. Adelaide hailed from a wealthy Charleston family, but she had failed in her primary socially mandated duty to produce a male heir. In 10 years of marriage, her body had betrayed her with 2 miscarriages and 1 stillborn child. A tiny moss-covered headstone in the family plot was a constant silent rebuke of her failure. Adelaide's private letters to her sister, discovered in a forgotten trunk in Savannah in 1954, are filled with obsessive, hateful references to the negress healer and her unholy, unnatural luck. In one letter from 1846, she writes, "She delivered another healthy boy in the quarters this morning. The sound of its crying reaches me even here in my parlor. It is a mockery. God denies me a son, yet he allows this creature to pull them from the womb as easily as pulling weeds. There is something unnatural in it. It is the work of the devil. I am certain of it." Adelaide Thorne was convinced Zillah was a witch. The turning point came with Adelaide Thorne's near-fatal illness in the winter of 1847. After the official physician, a Dr. Miles Peterson from Charleston, had bled the master, prescribed his useless mercury-laced tonics, and finally given up, declaring Thorne's condition fatal, a desperate Adelaide Thorne made a choice. It is a choice that is not recorded anywhere in her own writings, but is a cornerstone of the oral tradition. In the dead of night, she sent a house slave to fetch Zillah. The oral histories say a hush fell over the quarters as Zillah walked toward the big house. It was an unprecedented summons. What happened that night is a mystery. The stories only say that Zillah spent the entire night in the master's sick room, alone with him. By morning, his fever had broken. The recovery to all outside observers was miraculous, and from that moment on, the dynamic at Mudwood, Cypress Hollow, was irrevocably and dangerously altered. Zillah was granted unheard-of privileges. She was given her own small cabin near the main house, complete with a private garden where she could cultivate her herbs. She was relieved of all field labor. Adelaide Thorne, a practical man above all else, had recognized her value. He had come to see her not as a person but as his most precious asset, the key to his own survival and the plantation's prosperity. And in his wife's eyes, Zillah had become an intolerable threat, a living monument to a dark power that had succeeded where medicine and prayer had failed. This is where the second source of our story becomes critical: Adelaide Thorne's agricultural ledgers. On the surface, they are meticulous records of a well-run plantation. But beginning in the spring of 1848, a new coded language appears in the margins. She begins referring to a persistent pest problem using the recurring symbol of a serpent. She details methods of what she calls pest removal, using chillingly agricultural terms, uprooting the sapling before it can grow, and tainting the soil to prevent germination. She even notes the application of a blighting agent. For years, historians believed she was documenting a real agricultural issue. But in the 1970s, a graduate student cross-referenced these coded entries with the plantation's sparse birth and death records. A horrifying pattern emerged. Every mention of uprooting the sapling corresponds precisely to a documented miscarriage or stillbirth among the enslaved women. Every reference to tainting the soil precedes a period of inexplicable infertility in a specific woman or group of women. Adelaide Thorne was not practicing agriculture. She was documenting a systematic covert program of forced abortions and chemically induced sterilizations, likely using toxic herbs administered without the women's knowledge. It was a secret war fought with poisons and deceit against her rival's power base. Her primary target, however, was Zillah's own daughter, a girl named Seraphina. Seraphina does not appear in the official slave inventories until 1848, when she is listed simply as Seraphina, female, age 10. The oral history is clear and insistent on one detail. The girl had her mother's eyes, a pair of unsettling pale gray eyes that stood out among the dark-eyed population of the plantation. In Adelaide's coded ledger, Seraphina is referred to only as the serpent seed. Adelaide's entries become obsessed with the girl. May 1848. The serpent seed shows an unhealthy precociousness, a watchfulness. It must be monitored. July 1848. Observation confirms the seed carries the mother's taint. The gaze is the same. Removal of the primary pest may be insufficient. The entire lineage must be purged from this soil. Adelaide's plan, it seems, was to psychologically and spiritually destroy Zillah by destroying her child. In the fall of 1848, she had Seraphina brought into the big house under the pretense of training her as a house servant. The oral histories describe a campaign of quiet, insidious psychological torture. One account tells of Adelaide forcing the 10-year-old girl to polish a single silver spoon for an entire afternoon, over and over, while Adelaide sat and watched her, never speaking a word. Another tells of her being made to stand for hours in a corner of the parlor during social gatherings, like a piece of furniture forbidden to move or speak. All of this was done while Adelaide watched her, waiting for a sign of the mother's witchcraft to manifest in the child. The crisis, the event that would trigger the plantation's final downfall, came in the summer of 1849. A fever swept through the house slaves, claiming the life of a young boy named Thomas, who had become Adelaide's personal favorite, a surrogate for the son she could never have. In her grief and rage, Adelaide found her opportunity. She accused Serafina of murdering the boy with a curse, with the evil eye. This is where the official record and the hidden histories violently diverge into two irreconcilable narratives. The plantation's death log for 1849, a brittle, water-stained document, lists two entries for August of that year. The first reads, Thomas, male, age 12, died of fever. The second, entered on the very next line, reads, Zillah, female, age 31, died of fever. The official story, the one presented to the county and to history, is that Zillah, the great healer, ironically succumbed to the same illness that took the boy. But the oral tradition tells a different, far more terrible story. It says Zillah was never sick. It says that when Adelaide accused Serafina and ordered her to be punished, a punishment the stories imply was to be death by fire or branding, Zillah intervened. She walked to the big house and confronted the mistress. She made a terrible bargain. She would give Adelaide Thorne what she desired most in the world, a cure for her barrenness in exchange for her daughter's life and her freedom. Adelaide, consumed by her decade-long obsession for an heir, accepted the pact. It was a deal struck between two sworn enemies, a final desperate gambit. The oral history says Zillah returned to her cabin, and that night, as a full moon rose over the swamp, she prepared a special remedy. What happened next would seal the fate of everyone at Cypress Hollow, and lead to its eventual erasure from the memory of the world. The bargain struck between Adelaide Thorne and the enslaved healer Zillah was a formal pact, a deal made between two mortal enemies on the blood-soaked soil of Cypress Hollow. Adelaide, consumed by her decade-long obsession for an heir, accepted Zillah's terms, a remedy for her barrenness in exchange for the life and freedom of Zillah's daughter Serafina. According to the oral tradition, Zillah returned to her cabin that evening not with the triumphant air of a victor, but with the solemn gravity of a woman preparing for her own funeral. She knew, as Adelaide did not, that the remedy she was about to concoct would not bring life, but a terrible final judgment. That night, as a full moon rose over the cypress swamp, Zillah prepared the tincture. The oral histories do not specify the exact ingredients, shrouding them in the language of folk magic, but they speak of roots that scream when pulled from the earth and flowers that bloom only in darkness. It is in the terrified confession of Dr. Miles Peterson, however, that we find a more clinical and perhaps more horrifying truth. This is where our third source, the doctor's letter, becomes so crucial. Written in 1850, a full year after the events, it is a confession disguised as a professional consultation. Sent to a trusted colleague in Philadelphia, the fear in his words is palpable even after more than a century. He writes, I was consulted last autumn by Mrs. Adelaide Thorne of Cypress Hollow Plantation regarding a most unusual ailment. Following a treatment administered by one of her negress healers, a woman I am told possessed a disturbing local reputation for her knowledge of swamp botany, Mrs. Thorne suffered a violent, convulsive illness marked by extreme abdominal pain, uncontrollable hemorrhaging, and a delirium that lasted nearly a fortnight. I can find no medical precedent for her symptoms, which mimicked a severe case of ergotism yet lacked the accompanying gangrenous signs. By the grace of God, she survived, but my examination confirmed that she is now permanently and irrevocably barren, her reproductive organs so grievously damaged that I can only describe them as having been systematically destroyed from within. The negress who administered the remedy is said to have perished in a fever outbreak that very week, a fact I find suspiciously convenient. I fear a great crime was committed here, an act of vengeful poisoning disguised as folk medicine. I have been sternly warned by Mr. Thorne to speak of it to no one, and I shall obey, for I fear for my own safety, but I am left to wonder, my friend, was this a failed healing or a punishment of perfect terrible design? Dr. Peterson's letter, when viewed alongside the oral history, paints a chillingly clear picture. Zillah had not offered Adelaide a cure. She had offered a reckoning. She administered a powerful uterine poison, a cocktail of abortifacient and toxic herbs that did exactly what it was designed to do. It mimicked the agony of a miscarriage while simultaneously obliterating Adelaide's ability to ever conceive again. It was an act of rebellion so profound, so personal, and so exquisitely cruel. It could only be answered with death. The oral tradition says that while the big house was thrown into chaos, with Adelaide's screams echoing across the plantation, Zillah enacted the second half of her plan. She found her daughter, Seraphina, who was being held in a locked room in an outbuilding. How she freed her is unknown, but she did. In the darkness, she gave her daughter a small bundle containing a piece of bread and a smooth gray river stone. The instructions were precise. Run to the river, find a ferryman named Josiah who owed Zillah a life debt, give him the stone and say the words, "Zillah sends her regards." He would take her across. From there she was to run north and never ever look back. The last time Seraphina saw her mother, according to the story passed down, was as a silhouette against the dark tree line, watching her daughter run toward freedom. Zillah then turned and walked back toward the quarters to face the consequences of her actions. She had sacrificed herself for her child. The official record, as we know, states that Zillah, female, age 31, died of fever that week. The oral history is adamant. Zillah was not killed by a fever. She was executed by a vengeful Adelaide Thorne. The exact method is a missing piece of the puzzle, a secret the enslaved community kept to themselves. Some versions of the story say she was hanged from the great live oak that stood between the big house and the quarters. Others say she was weighted with stones and drowned in the black water of the Cypress swamp. Returned to the source of her power. Her body was never found. What is certain is that from that day forward, a new kind of silence fell over Cypress Hollow. For the next 10 years, the plantation operated under the cold, efficient hand of Adelaide Thorne. With his health restored and his wife a broken recluse, he focused solely on profits. But the place was cursed. Adelaide Thorne became a ghost in her own home, a bitter, childless woman confined to the upper floors of the mansion, never seen by anyone but a single house slave. The enslaved population worked in a state of suppressed terror, ruled by an overseer who knew what had happened and used that secret to enforce a brutal discipline. The land produced cotton, but the spirit of the place was dead. Then came the Civil War. Adelaide Thorne, a fervent secessionist, joined the Confederate Army and was killed at the Battle of Antietam in 1862. The plantation, now legally owned by the sequestered Adelaide, was left in the hands of an overseer. When General Sherman's army marched through Georgia in 1864, Their path bypassed Burke County, leaving Cypress Hollow untouched by the direct violence of the war. But in the chaos of the war's end in 1865, with the collapse of the Confederacy and the emancipation of its enslaved people, something happened at the plantation, something that led to its final, utter erasure from the map. Archeological surveys of the site, conducted in the 1990s by a team from the University of Georgia, confirmed that the main house burned to the ground sometime between 1865 and 1870. The fire, according to the vitrification of the brick foundation, was intensely hot, suggesting the use of an accelerant like kerosene. The cause was never officially determined. After the fire, the land was abandoned. The remaining freedmen, those who had not already left to find family or opportunity elsewhere, scattered. By 1870, the property was listed as derelict. By 1880, after years of neglect and legal ambiguity surrounding Adelaide Thorne's fate, she is presumed to have died in the fire, the land was seized by Burke County for unpaid taxes. The name Cypress Hollow ceased to appear on any official documents. The land itself was eventually broken up and sold to timber companies. History, it seemed, had successfully buried its dead. The story might have ended there, a local legend, a ghost story whispered by the descendants of those who had lived it. But what of Serafina, the girl with her mother's eyes? Did she make it to freedom? Did Zillah's sacrifice succeed? For decades, that question remained unanswered. The thread went cold. But in 2003, a genealogist researching post-Civil War Black communities in Philadelphia made a discovery. She found the 1867 marriage certificate of a woman named Sarah Mitchell. The certificate was notable for what it lacked. Sarah's place of birth was listed simply as unknown, and her parents' names were left blank. The genealogist, intrigued, dug deeper. She found census records, church documents, and eventually a death certificate. Sarah Mitchell had worked as a seamstress. She was known in her community for her quiet, reserved nature and, according to a note in a church registry, for her striking pale gray eyes. She married a carpenter named William Mitchell and lived a long, quiet life, dying of heart failure in 1912. The couple never had children. This on its own was circumstantial, a coincidence of eye color and an unknown past. But the genealogist's research then uncovered the most crucial piece of evidence, the link that connected the quiet seamstress in Philadelphia to the horrors of Cypress Hollow. It was an interview transcript from 1938, conducted by an agent of the Works Progress Administration's Federal Writers Project, part of their effort to document the life stories of ordinary Americans. The interviewee was an elderly black man named Elijah Carter, who had grown up in the same Philadelphia church as Sarah Mitchell. Asked if he remembered her, his reply was recorded verbatim. "Oh yes, I remember Miss Sarah. A fine, quiet woman, kept to herself mostly. My grandmother was close with her. She used to say Miss Sarah came from down south, that she'd seen terrible things as a little girl. Said her mother was a conjure woman, a root doctor, who sent her away on the Freedom Train to save her life. My grandmother said her mother had made a bargain with the devil, or maybe with God, to burn a plantation to the ground and set all the people free. I don't know about all that. It sounds like a folk tale. But I know this. My grandmother said Miss Sarah never went near a swamp or a river if she could help it. And sometimes when she thought no one was looking, like when she was sewing or sitting in church, she'd stop and stare at her own hands. Just stare at them, like she was afraid of what they might do." The connection, though confirmed only by oral history, is compelling. The timeline fits, the unique physical description fits. And the inherited trauma, the fear of her own hands, the hands of a healer's daughter, the hands of a witch's daughter, fits perfectly. Was Sarah Mitchell the girl once known as Serafina? Was she the living legacy of the Witch of Cypress Hollow? The final truth of what happened on that plantation is buried with the people who lived it. Zillah's body was never found. Her story exists only in whispers, in the coded entries of a madwoman's ledger, and in the unsettling blank space on an old county map. It persists because it speaks to a deeper truth about the institution of slavery, not just the physical brutality of the lash, but the intricate psychological warfare, the clash of power and belief, and the terrible hidden acts of rebellion carried out by those who were denied any other form of resistance. Zillah was not just a victim. In the end, she became an agent of justice, in a world that offered none. And her story, so carefully erased from history, is a testament to the fact that you can burn the records, tear down the houses, and redraw the maps, but you can never truly silence the knowing.